I will just quickly turn it over to Ann Feeman. Ann, there you go. Why don't you start the whole... Can't hear you, Ann. You got your mute on, Ann.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
All right. Sorry about that. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see this okay?
Yep.
All right. I'll make this. Okay. Are we ready to begin then, Commissioner Ortega?
Yeah. Yes, please take it away. It's not
perfect. Thank you. So I'm Ann Feeman. I'm the Deputy HR Director over the talent team. And if it's okay, I'm going to introduce the team that's on board today. And I want to just let you know today that Gail Blackstone, our HR Director, is not with us today, but Sandy and I will be presenting on her behalf. So I am going to turn it over to the sponsors who are on board with us. I don't know if, I thought I saw Karen, Francois dial in. Are any of the TARP 1 sponsors here? I know I'm presenting for those folks today.
I'm here, Ann. And Kathy and Elizabeth should be here shortly. You guys started right on time.
Sounds good. So Karen, Francois, Elizabeth Tolsman, and Kathy Hadeen are the TARP 1 sponsors. And then for TARP 2, I have Sandy. Sandy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Sandy Blazer, and I am the other Deputy Director in Human Resources over the Enterprise team, and been involved with Gail and Ann with the TARP 2 work as well as the 3 and 4 work.
All right, sounds good. And then I don't know if Scott, I know Joanna is on. I'm not sure if Scott is yet, but.
Good afternoon, Joanna Berg, Deputy County Manager, EGCI, and one of the 3 TARP 3 and 4 sponsors, along with Scott Williams, Deputy County Manager in Safety and Justice, and Gail Blackstone, HR Director.
Awesome, thank you. And then today we have joining with us Shantan Howell, who is working with us on the TARP 1 project, and Felice Abea, who is working with us as a project manager. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next step section as we cover that. So today our goal is to give updates on where we are within all of the different TARP themes. And TARP is a talent attraction, retention, promotion strategic priority that is really about positioning Ramsey County as the premier public sector employer, one in which folks want to come work for and stay here for, you know, as long as they can to really grow their career, and one in which we want to create an inclusive and diverse work culture. So we were here in August, provided a brief update about where we are. A lot more work has happened since then. And so we're going to provide a brief recap of the work that we've done so far today and an update about where we are. So I hope that sounds good to everyone. I'm covering the TARP Theme 1 countywide culture, aligning our values and our behaviors. Today for Karen and Elizabeth and Kathy, I was brought in as the HR lead essentially on this project as well. And so this first slide here is really just a preview, if you will, of where we've been. And so we created the values, people, integrity, community, equity, and leadership. And values are only as good as, right, the behaviors that we expect of our employees and that our employees can really expect of us, and to really be able to live those values on a daily basis. And so the idea behind this was to get our employee feedback in terms of what behaviors made sense and have their input so that we could also have their buy-in about the type of culture we want to create. And so we did a survey back in January with all of our staff that we sent out, and we had them identify possible behaviors that aligned with each of those values. And then in the last couple of weeks of January, we looked at and condensed really the duplicates, kind of put together themes of behaviors that we saw, and worked with our consultant to do that work and really make sure that we increased specificity around what types of behaviors were laid out with the values. Then the idea was to really narrow down. So we got a ton of different values. Essentially, we were able to begin to start to narrow those down and get input from our staff around that. And so we held quite a few workshops starting in February and March, but we were only able to get through people and integrity at that time. And so because of the response with COVID that happened around March 16th, we weren't able to continue those workshops. And so we slowed down, or we paused. But we had a plan in September and October to come back together to re-engage that change management team. And so you'll see that here in that blue section. And in September and October, we started talking about how would we go about doing that, and let's get this set up again. So in October and November, we kick the team back off, and we are designing essentially what will be virtual workshops to continue that work around the behaviors, to select those best behaviors. And so we're excited about that, and excited to have those start hosting again those workshops in a virtual fashion over the next couple of months. So just a brief update, we reconvened the team in November, and we are working on finalizing those behaviors in the next few months and incorporating those into our competency model, which you'll hear more about in the upcoming theme. We plan to have that work done over the next few months. We know that with the COVID response as it is right now, it's probably going to take us a little bit more time. And so we've set our goal to complete this work in April of 2020. And then our plan is to come back to the board and report at the end of that TARP 1 project. Does anyone have any questions about the TARP theme 1 work? All right, sounds great. All right, so I'm going to move into the TARP theme 2. That's HR as a strategic business partner. And this is a little bit heavier in terms of the work that we've been doing. So we'll review what is TARP theme 2, just to kind of ground us back in what that work is. Looking at what does it mean to be a strategic partner. So looking first at what our current state has been and where we plan to move to, and really create that vision for what HR can be in terms of a strategic partner. We will also look at the case for change in terms of how important this work really is to the achieving and aligning with the goals and the strategic priorities of the county, and helping to drive that for the county as well. And we'll talk about our phase 1 scope. So we are currently closing out our phase 1 scope. And so we'll talk a little bit about what we did around creating that vision, all of the different work streams within phase 1. We won't go into them in detail here, but we'll provide you with those steps around our plans for coming back to the board with the different work streams and reporting out a little bit further on those. So just as a reminder, TARP theme 2 is really about positioning HR as a strategic business partner. It's making sure that we are aligning with our service teams and really enhancing our processes and systems to align with the desired culture we want to see in the county and with the values that we have articulated. So it's making sure that we are creating a place that is attracting, retaining, and promoting top talent within the county, and also working with our service teams, our departments, our supervisors and managers to really understand what talent we need here in the county, and how do we customize our talent strategies to make sure that we are supporting the priorities of those departments and of those strategic teams. It's about being proactive versus reactive, and it's about ensuring that we are the ones that are helping to drive racial equity internally within the county and inclusion, and really building and supporting a culture of continuous learning and development. So this is just, again, to kind of articulate, you know, we have really grown a lot even in the past, I think, year or more as we undergo this work. And we're really looking at moving ourselves from being very transactionally based, being order takers, like people really requesting, hey, we need you to do this, and just having us move immediately on it, right, to do it. And there's a time and a place for that, and we do need to be transactional in nature at some points, right? But it's really about creating an HR office that is aligned to our strategies and that is outcome oriented. It's also about making sure that these standalone sort of HR programs are really integrated into our overall county mission and priorities. And most importantly, that we are working with our IS area and our other areas to make sure that we are really integrating those technology enhanced solutions, and that we're really utilizing technology to further our efforts here in HR as well. Looking at being a top-down control sort of work environment where work has been typically completed at that highest level, and really developing and enabling our staff to be able to do a lot of this work that, you know, that can be done right at the appropriate levels. And again, building that high performing team by developing our HR staff skills, and then moving from being a reputation of sort of that barrier, right, where people don't necessarily want to work with us, or maybe they want to avoid us, or they don't want us to be the folks that are saying, no, you can't do that, to being that respected partner. So being the partner at the table when solutions are being proposed, so that we can also have input and help people get to solutions. So this was a model that we built. You may have seen this in August when we presented last time to you, but it really is our model around ensuring that our HR strategy is created and aligned with the strategies of the county as a whole and our values. And so this is rooted in, if you look at the bottom part, right, the foundation, this is rooted in making sure that we are executing those administrative processes, the compliance sort of driven pieces, the foundation of our HR work in an excellent manner, and that we, you know, get that foundation right, but that it's especially rooted in the values of the county as well. And then the values really inform all of those walls of the house, right, if you will, that those specific pillars are informed by those values. And so that when we talk about HR as a strategic partner, we're talking about developing and delivering on a talent strategy. So being very outcome oriented in how we attract talent and how we retain talent within the county. That second pillar is around knowing and advising on business operations. So the more we know, we understand the business, the more that we can support it more efficiently. And then the last piece really is around championing that employee experience, and that it's really HR's role to help do that and ensure that our values are incorporated into that employee experience. So it's establishing a strong foundation, ensuring that we are being consistent and timely in the business of HR, but then also standing up those strategic pillars to be able to become more outcome oriented. This is just to give you a snapshot of HR, what we call a maturity curve. And this isn't necessarily unique to Ramsey County. I've worked in a lot of government spaces. There have been a lot of studies that have been done around this. And what this shows is that HR really has evolved in the last few decades, especially within government. And so looking at sort of personnel transaction oriented, if you will, pieces that HR really had sort of started out with, right, to execute on payroll and benefits and really look after like discipline and behavior of employees and sick leave and all of those sort of personnel transactional types of things. And it's not that we don't still have to do those kinds of things, we do, but HR has really evolved into being more employee engagement, or driving that employee engagement, right? Managing performance, recruiting talent, then being more people-centric, in terms of helping to manage and grow talent within the work environment to being that strategic partner. And so that's happening across our government organizations. And what we're estimating is that this really is a 3 to 5 year journey. And I think Commissioner McDonough, you had a question. Did I see your hand raised?
Yep, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, Jan. I'm not seeing.
No
it.
worries,
Yeah, go
no
ahead.
worries. So when I was looking at the documentation, I really looked at this slide a lot, but there's some pieces to this. And maybe just help me understand, kind of this, because I see this kind of being laid out as a linear thing, right? But I look at foundational excellence, and I get all that. That's like the basis. But some of this strategic transformational work needs to be in place to make sure that that's built into our hiring and firing and our sick leave. Some of these policy stuff needs some of the strategic transformational work to actually, I don't want to build a foundation on kind of like functional things that we've done the same old way that really might need some of this transformative work to really be a foundation to help make that successful. So help me understand how this kind of works in parallel versus a linear way.
Commissioner McDonough,
Does that make sense?
absolutely. You ask a very good question, and that really is, it's really important and critical because you're right. The foundation has to be done in a more strategic way to really stand up a lot of these pillars to be able to do some of the more sort of transformative work, if you will. And so part of this is looking at modernizing our policies and practices as well. And you'll hear more about that in TARP 3, which we are also doing at the same time. I think what I'm hoping that you'll take away from this is that it doesn't necessarily have to be that we do A first to get to B and then to get to C, right? That there are pieces of this that we can work on in a strategic fashion across the board. I just want to reiterate, if you will, that it will take us some time to get there. And I don't know, Sandy, if you wanted to add anything to that.
I think we have another slide that's coming up, Commissioner, that will also help sort of frame, the approach on all of this, and really trying to create a culture of accountability that comes with all of this work. And so it puts into play all the values work that we've been doing, and that's where I think we reach that transformative level. When we start lacing in the values and start using those as filters or lenses against which we look at all of our policies and procedures and other activities.
Okay. So am I okay to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So the next slide, as Sandy mentioned, is that 3 to 5 year progression. If we're looking at the previous slide, which is the HR maturity curve as a whole, right, holistically across sort of HR organizations, if you will, this is sort of our 3 to 5 year progression. And we are heavy into phase 1 work, but as Sandy mentioned, this isn't necessarily linear, right? There is some work that's happening that is in a phase 2, that is in phase 2 here in phase 3. So what I want you to take away from this slide is that there's a lot of work for us to do here, and we're really excited about that. But there's also it's not necessary that these are building blocks per se, that there's some work that we can engage in and finish in phase 1 and move into phase 2. There are some things that we can start already and have been started, like employee resource groups, right, which is heavy into some of the phase 2, phase 3 work that's been happening. So I want to provide you with sort of a roadmap, if you will, that'll take about 3 to 5 years for a full progression for HR to be that strategic partner as we envision it. But there's a lot of work that is happening, that's continuing to happen, and we estimate roughly that we are about 18 months in, give or take. For the COVID response, things have slowed down a little bit, but in some ways we've been able to demonstrate being more proactive versus reactive, even through the COVID response, which has been really exciting for us. This next slide demonstrates a case for change in terms of we have a mission and a vision that is Ramsey County's, and goals that we have set really to help strengthen our community and enhance opportunities for our residents and for our businesses, right? So that our community will thrive here in Ramsey County. And this is really about making sure that we are bringing that vision and that mission and our goals to life for our employees as well, which brings us to this next slide and what we call the employee life cycle, if you will. And what I'm demonstrating, or what we're demonstrating here, is really how we go about bringing our mission, vision, values, and goals to life for Ramsey County. So HR really is kind of the center in terms of driving culture and recruiting, onboarding, retention, development, et cetera, right, throughout the talent life cycle. And so we want to make sure that we are providing a culture that will instill well-being within our employees. So aiming towards that goal for our employees specifically. So you'll see those colors essentially of our goal, and along with our culture piece, those align. And then the green is really about building opportunities, one for talent pathways into Ramsey County, whether it's through the typical job application process or it's through some of our other public pathways. How do we recruit talent into the county and create opportunities for individuals? And then how do we provide additional opportunity for growth by onboarding and having individuals come in and really learn and grow into their roles here within the county? And then creating, again, reiterating the culture piece and making sure that we're doing a good job of retaining employees, and then continuing to develop and to really invest in employees' development here within the county, so that we can continue to move employees into other opportunities and build a plan for succession, so that we are setting the county up for success. And that even if employees transition away from the county, that their time spent here has been a valuable part of really building their career and their, achieving their goals while they've been here with the county. I do see that there are some questions.
Go ahead, Ann. Why don't you keep going, and we'll try and save the questions when you finish
Okay.
your set. Oh, you wanted to go ahead, Jim? Go ahead.
Well, thanks, Raphael. And this might be the slide, and you touched, your last statement really touched on it when I was looking through this again, because we can't set this up where if we lose, we invest in employees, we're doing everything right, we're attracting them, we're retaining them, but then they move on, right? Because this culture, especially for this younger workforce, they may have 5, 6 different jobs, let alone maybe 5 or 6 different careers, right? And so we can't view it as a failure if we start losing people, or we're setting ourselves up for failure. But people leaving here thinking that Ramsey County truly is a county of excellence, right? It's those relationships and what they take away from here, but they also might return to us after 5 years of somewhere else with that experience. And so how do we set that up? And you started talking about it, I actually lowered my hand, but in that separation and transition, it's not just about, oh, shoot, it's regrettable, we're losing somebody, it's all right. So what is the opportunity as you move on in your career path away from Ramsey County and making sure that, their thoughts about us and even how they interact wherever they go next is all positive about their.
Mr. Chair, if I could give a short response to part of that. And Commissioner McDonough, part of the smiles came from your voice went from very slow and elongated like a crooner to the Elvin and the Chipmunks across the different times as you spoke. So we're not laughing at your comment, but we are laughing at the delivery. To your point, I think that's well taken, and it's something that we talk about a lot. I think actually a measure of success is your employees will at times be poached. You want them to stay for reasons where they choose to stay as a part of a broader service mission. You have many of those great leaders on here right now. There are people being sought after all the time, and that's a part of what we need to be okay with. I think it's also a mark of success that we seed other organizations across our region with people who share similar values and visions. And so we definitely see that, and not as a mark of a bad thing. We also want to make sure people do have paths to grow here as well. And so it's a little bit of a both and. We don't want to be seen as a place where we capture you and you can never go on to other things, but we want to see it as a home maybe now and maybe again in the future. And I'll end on a point. Kathy Hadeen and I were speaking recently about someone who used to work here who doesn't right now, but is doing good work in the community, who reached out and expressed interest about, hey, like, what's the future of Ramsey County looking like, was kind of the question that came back our way, which is a really great sign when people are saying, I was there once, I've gotten to do some good work, but my good work with the county might not be done yet if you still have interest. And those are good parts to the story. So I just wanted to illuminate that and say thank you. I think we're on the same page for something.
Go ahead, Ann.
Okay.
And I just want to let you know, Elvin the Chipmunk here is doing the best he can with no power to his house. I'm in the dark. I have no Wi-Fi, but amazingly, I'm still on.
That's impressive, Commissioner McDonough. I would just also say that, one of the number one ways that we recruit individuals is through word of mouth. And so if somebody has a positive experience where they grow here at the county, they're going to tell lots of people, right, about that experience and how it was a great place to be, and that they should come work here. And so I think it's also an awesome recruitment tool to have, as well as a way to build relationships with other entities that they may go to. So thanks.
Could I add, I don't see that as a negative at all. We have to interact with the whole region. And to the extent that we've built, because they were former employees, good relationships, that just makes the task at hand that much easier. So, I just don't, I don't see it as a huge concern for me anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Ortega. So, and I mean, obviously, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, right? But this is important to us as a county because we want to become the public sector employer of choice in the Twin Cities, in the metro region. It's important for us because we will be and have already been competing for talent, especially as we continue to experience talent shortages, especially in some segments of the industry. We also want to make sure that we are making best use of our talent, right? It is the fiscal responsible thing to do. It is the important thing to do in terms of creating a culture where our employees can learn and grow. And so making sure that we are doing that all in service to our residents. And that's, a key thing that we always want to keep in mind. It's ensuring that our talent decisions that we make here in the county are aligned with the county strategies and goals that we have set for ourselves, and that we are continuing to create that foundation for long-term success. Racial equity is a big piece of the work that we're doing here in HR, so making sure that we are able to lead that internally and make meaningful racial equity change within the county's workforce, that we're able to be nimble and proactive, and especially as the pace of change increases. And I think that we've been able to demonstrate that through our COVID response here in the county. and that we're partnering, with service teams to create those customized talent solutions, knowing what they need, both short-term and long-term, and how do we help them plan to really get there. And then really making better use of our own HR talent and growing our talent in-house, because we have a lot of amazing people in the HR office. And beginning to really engage in not just process improvements, but as Commissioner McDonough said, making sure that we're really looking at how can we be more transformative, and most importantly, move to that solutions-oriented perspective. So we started with our phase 1 scope in that foundational piece. And as we mentioned, it's not necessarily like all foundation. So we did start in that develop and deliver the talent strategy sort of prong or wall, if you will. And so we focused on those 2 areas. Part of the reason that we focused on those 2 areas is because when we did some stakeholder engagement, and we also engaged with service teams, I believe earlier in the year, probably a little bit before I came to the county, we learned that some of the pain points specifically were around recruiting and were around the hiring process specifically. And then sometimes around some of the daily sort of administrative things that people felt maybe they weren't supported, that they needed some additional assistance and tools, and that that oftentimes we were that, like we mentioned earlier, that barrier, right? So how can we make things more efficient for folks to be able to find the things that they need, design processes that make sense, maybe that need to be updated a little bit, and then focus in on really our recruiting and hiring piece. So we're not going to go into all of these work streams today, but essentially there were many projects happening in this overall TARP 2 project that we've been leading. And first, we focused on our own internal house, if you will, in HR, and looked at our own leadership development and how we could really grow our HR leadership and our HR team as a whole. And then we had 3 separate action teams, again, sort of based on what I would call those pain points or areas that were identified for improvement. So looking at the work of what we call our general services or generalist team and how they provide services and support our service teams and departments. We took a look at what hiring process improvements we could make. And then we looked at also our performance management and talent development area as well. So there were a ton of recommendations that came out of those groups, and I'll talk about that really briefly in a second. And then we engaged in a few process improvements, especially on the benefits side. And we also engaged in a few other work streams about how to better communicate this, not just to you all, but to our staff and our leaders in this organization. And then looked at developing metrics and a scorecard, if you will. The approach to these work streams were really about a change champion model, which meant that we identified a change champion within HR, and we worked through a co-creation model. So we engaged that champion along with members of the HR team across HR, which will eventually expand out to our stakeholders as well to get input on this first set of work that we've accomplished. But really it was to help get ownership of that within our team. And so those change champions engaged with ROIG, they were part of that initial first phase 1 work, and they help lead us through that work. They also were a subject matter expert. They served as a discussion partner, and then they really engaged the entire team that was a part of each of those action teams to help keep the work moving and get input and feedback and recommendations on what that work looks like. So just a little bit about our accomplishments. Within our own HR team development, we conducted some leadership style assessments. We engaged in the Strengths Finder. We also engaged in the emotional intelligence piece and have plans for also engaging in the IDI among our HR team. And so some of these were completed across the entire HR team. It helped us all build self-awareness and create a common language about how we work together and what types of skills really kind of rose to the top for people in terms of their strengths and how we can better utilize those strengths. And so we've had a lot of great conversation and kind of working around those pieces. We also engaged in team effectiveness workshops We started specifically with our HR leadership team and our general services team. Both of those teams engaged in developing a shared team purpose. So not a mission, but a purpose in how we accomplish, right, the county's mission. And so that was really important to kind of forging our work and making sure that we were being efficient in the work that we were doing. We also came up with team and individual commitments about how we would work with each other, and how we would treat each other in that work. And then we identified what we call business drivers. We talked a lot about those at the very beginning of this presentation, and maybe some barriers that, that could get in our way, so that we're just aware of those. And then the third piece really was around individual development plans. So we started with our leadership team. This was really a model that we would like to eventually roll out to the county through our performance management work. But we did it in-house first so that we could develop our own coaching and mentoring skills with our team, and then role model what that will eventually look like for the county. And you'll hear more about that work soon to come. So there are a lot of accomplishments to date. I know you saw some of these in our last presentation. I just wanted to highlight a few. We did realign HR. It used to be one team with like 6 different divisions, if you will, or areas of HR. We essentially realigned into 2 teams, called one, the talent team, which consists of general services, diversity, inclusion, and organizational development, and the enterprise team. So that consists of benefits, labor relations, investigations, and the capability team as well. And brought on myself and Sandy Blazer as the deputy directors, began the internal improvements to the hiring process. You'll hear more about those to come, as well as internal communication and planning within HR. So looking at meeting effectiveness and how we could be a more efficient, well-oiled machine, right, within HR over the last few months. And then implemented an assessment and development planning process for our team. Again, you'll hear more about that in the performance management section. We co-created a Ramsey County competency model, and we'll be piloting that with our team. You'll hear more about that. Identified a long-term performance strategy and roadmap as well, a performance appraisal form and development form. And just a note, we have engaged with the Technology Governance Committee and in a discovery project for performance development tools as well, because we do believe that this will help us make the most efficient use of our talent and really help managers and supervisors engage in that performance feedback process as well. And then we've created a roadmap for alignment and focus for the talent team specifically. And we've mapped some internal benefits processes and then engaged, as I mentioned, in those team effectiveness workshops. So that was phase 1. Phase 2 is really about, okay, taking all of the recommendations that we've put together, beginning to really implement that in a thoughtful way, and then really creating and standing up what we call a talent strategy. And that involves workforce planning and succession planning and all of those things that are critically important, as well as our recruiting and talent acquisition strategy. And so in phase 2, we'll continue as well that foundational work in terms of transforming our policies and systems. And then phase 3, really looking, obviously want to build strong relationships regardless, but in phase 3, really focusing in on that and elevating our strategic skill sets of our HR team as well, and then implementing that talent strategy.
Excuse me, Ann.
Yes.
Tony has a question.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Tony.
I really want to applaud this work, and in particular to recognize the individual development planning process that goes, I believe, far beyond what we have today, and it can be an honest process of even helping employees to realize that career planning as an honest process can involve the exploration of possibilities within Ramsey County for one's expanded or enhanced career, but it also can be a process that engages just talking about goals and development needs in order to get to one's development or to one's plans in life. And that's a really serious process of being able to be honest with employees and expect some level of honesty between employees and management as we work to help people understand that where they may be going, could be accomplished within the county, and doing far more than just putting courses out there that can help them to get there, but actually being very, very deliberate, as we're beginning to see in various service teams across the county right now, and helping people to walk through their personal careers. I'm also very, very interested in that process of performance assessment and individual development planning that is being piloted in HR, and hope that it's not being piloted over a number of years, but that because our processes do need enhancement currently, that work can be available sooner rather than later for people to begin to implement within the business areas. Can you just talk a little bit about what you foresee with respect to that
Yes,
being
absolutely. Thank
implemented?
you. Yes, thank you, Commissioner Carter. I appreciate that question, because you're right. We certainly can't be piloting this thing for a year longer, right, within HR. We have started, like I said, mentioned with the leadership team, the plan is to roll it out broader to the rest of the team over the next couple of months. We do have a feedback process in place so that we can get feedback from our staff as well around how is the tool working? Is it sparking conversation? Does this make sense to you? How does it feel, right? Because really this is about engaging our employees so that they can better their career and their future here, and providing a tool by which managers and supervisors are also comfortable with, to guide them through that conversation, because sometimes it's not, right, second nature. The plan is to do that over the next couple of months, and then to engage a couple of departments in that process as well. And so we don't have the exact timeline laid out, but you'll hear about Felice Abella we've brought on as a project manager through the Enterprise Project Management Office, and she is helping us essentially build that timeline out. But the plan will be to have a couple of departments pilot it with us through, I think, probably about summertime, just to see, okay, does this work for you? Can we get more feedback from our stakeholders? But it's really important to inform folks about the competency model and what those expectations are in terms of, what we expect from our employees, and, how we're gonna hold them to their performance, and what expectations they have, and how we're going to, right, essentially assess their performance. And so because of that, this next slide really addresses kind of that deeper dive, if you will. I know there is a lot here, and County Manager O'Connor can attest to the fact that I think we had him in presentation mode for like 3 hours, right, talking through all this stuff. So the plan is to come back to all of you over the next couple of weeks. Or a couple of months, December 15th, we're actually coming back to the board to present on our performance management competency model framework, so that you will all have a preview of what we've done so far, and then what the plan is around that performance management piece, so that you can see what that's going to look like in more detail. The second piece that we'll dive into then sometime in January, February, as time allows, is diving deeper into that hiring process improvement and the recruiting talent strategy pieces. So all of the phase one work we've done, and what we plan to roll out in this next phase. So we'll do a deeper dive there. And then the third piece will be around how we provide services, our service delivery model, and the plan to essentially look at potentially restructuring, or some recommendations for restructuring HR, and what that looks like, and how we can be essentially more aligned with the service teams here within the county. So we're really excited about that. As I mentioned, we're not going to dive into all of that today, because I will have you here for quite some time. And so in addition to that, with the addition of our project manager for this project, as well as the other TARP themes, we are planning to provide more ongoing and regular communication, which has proven to be challenging during the COVID-19 response, and without kind of having that point person available to us to help us with that and provide feedback, communication and get feedback from our stakeholders on those projects. And so phase 2 is pretty much set to begin coming up soon here.
Yeah, and let me just add the one thing to that, Commissioner Carter. Today's goal is that balcony level view of how these many puzzle pieces are coming together, because there are a ton, and it's staggering. And it took 10 hours of time being spent with me to get me to a level where I felt comfortable even with today and the plan moving forward. And what I really thought about was like, we need to do this in a multi-series conversation with the board, because it is a lot of work and it's important work. And so today's the balcony, and then we're going to kind of walk down the stairs over these coming months in the way that Ann just described.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary Jo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question back on TARP 1. I didn't know if we would get to it, but I'm going to ask it now before TARP 3.
Oh, go ahead.
Just, when you mentioned the behaviors in TARP, the 10 behaviors, can you just, that you're going to whittle this down to that all these behaviors whittle down? I just wanted an example of a behavior. Like, are you talking being on time, or when you talk about a behavior, I just wanted an example, so in my head I could be thinking of the right thing.
Yes, absolutely. So Commissioner, we talked about recently actually around the behaviors of integrity. So when we say we value integrity, what does that mean, right? How do we as individuals show up, and how do we as an organization? So there's two focuses there, right? As an employee, what is the expectation about how you show up at work? And what is the expectation, or what can an employee expect from the organization? And so we looked at one of the behaviors we identified was holding each other accountable, right? Holding our leaders accountable for when things maybe don't go the right way, right? If somebody is potentially violating, in a more serious fashion, right? An ethical standard, essentially being able to hold each other accountable, or if we're just not acting in a way that's really in alignment with our values, being able to call that out. For individuals, or I should say for the organization, expecting that employees can come forward and can bring concerns forward that we're not acting in alignment with our ethical standards, and be able to be free from like retaliation, or not have to be fearful of bringing those concerns forward, is something that they can expect from the organization. So those were some of the things. We didn't quite finalize those yet, but those were some of the things that we talked about what that means to show up with integrity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to get my head around those things, because I know we're moving into theme 3, but I wanted to think about it that way. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ann.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Ortega. So I am going to pass this over to Scott.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I am here to talk about theme 3, which is, of course, will modernize our personnel rules to align with our culture and values. This slide is basically a recap of the slide that we covered in our August board workshop, so I'll move through it really quickly. In the way of background, personnel rules, it covers everything from filling vacancies, determining compensation levels. It doesn't set the compensation, but it determines how new employees move into the compensation system, how promotions are handled, disciplinary action if needed, and then subsequent appeals, and then ultimately separation from service. Early on in the process, our vendor held focus groups with hiring managers and directors from throughout the organization. That was September of last year. We heard from our departments around things like need for increased flexibility to hire and retain talented employees, particularly employees of color. We heard that rules can be difficult to understand and even find where the rules are that you're looking for. And written in a fairly high level, kind of dense language. rather than plain language that is really becoming more the industry norm. And some feedback that, you know, our rules are written in a way that don't really feel like they're valuing our employees or reflective of our values. And then, of course, need for more training across the board and more consistent understanding of those rules and policies. Our vendor also conducted a survey of practices in comparable organizations, looking at recruiting and hiring practices, benefits, compensation administration, policies on training and promotion, workforce planning, and those findings from those surveys, you know, are being incorporated or have been incorporated into the recommendations that we've received from the vendor. Our vendor observed that you know, you've got rules in multiple places, and making it harder to find stuff. I mean, we've got the personnel rules, and then we've got Chapter 4 of the Administrative Code, which contain things like background screening, drug-free workplace, respectful workplace, paid parental leave, and then Chapter 9 is the Code of Ethics. And then all the leave stuff is actually covered in our benefits policies. So if you've been around for a while, you know, and working in the county system, you start to recognize, where do I go to look for this stuff? But if you're new if you're a newer employee, it's very confusing, and you have a hard time trying to find, like, you know, where are the rules on sick leave use? I can't find it in the personnel rules because they're not in there. So we need to fix that and make that more intuitive, try to consolidate things in more places, in one place, and use plain language. And of course, many of the personnel rules are tied to theme 4, class and compensation. So there's a lot of the stuff that's cross-cutting into theme 4. Let's jump to the next slide. It's theme 3 is taking longer than expected, not unlike much of the other work that you know, that's happening right now. Part of the problem is, or the big part of the problem is, you know, as we get theme 3 recommendations for changes to the personnel rules, it requires the same subject matter expert that are busy working on theme 2, which, you know, we've just heard a lot about the great stuff that's happening on theme 2 and things that have been keeping our friends in HR very busy this past year. And also, we need those same subject matter experts to be working on the feedback on the theme 4 recommendations that we're getting. You know, how the job families are organized, how the new job descriptions are being worded. It's so there's a lot of things that are, you know, a lot of initiatives that are competing for the same subject matter experts. And that's really been bogging things down. And these are also the folks that are busy working on things that are the day-to-day needs of the departments, and also the things that are unique to 2020, because after all, it is 2020 and we're dealing with COVID, and that COVID throws us a curve, you know, every so often. So we've pivoted to asking our vendor to just prepare a comprehensive list of all of your recommendations. We'll do a quick review, and we have been doing quick reviews, and give us an opportunity to ask questions where we're not clear on what they're proposing. And if we are clear on what they're proposing, then we're good. We'll consider that delivered. And so what we're looking for the vendor to do is just finish your deliverables, finish your recommendations. Once we understand what you're proposing, then we will circle back to it and then start working on it in a more integrated fashion as we have time to implement it. So let's jump to the next slide. So phase 3 then will be accomplished in, you know, the theme 3 will be accomplished in 3 phases. One is what I've just mentioned. We want our vendor Gallagher to finish the deliverables, and we'll finish our initial review, making sure that we're clear on what they're proposing and we don't have any questions. And then we're going to prioritize the implementation of the personnel rules that are related to compensation. What we found is where we need time to work on theme 4 stuff and theme 3, where they're competing for the same time, we've been prioritizing theme 4 over theme 3. We think that was a wise thing to do. Theme 4 is based on salary survey data that, you know, is tied to you know, the year 2000 or 2020 is tied to 2020 data, so it's somewhat perishable. So there's a little more sense of urgency to wrap up the TARP 4 work TARP 3, we've got some more time. And as you can see, the revision of the personnel rules really needs to be done hand in hand with theme 2. We just heard all this great narrative about how theme 2 is going to change our personnel processes, the business process re-engineering work, performance management systems development. All the stuff is going to inform the rewrite of our personnel rules. And that stuff has to be done in tandem to, Commissioner McDonough's earlier point in our workshop where, we said you can't do this stuff, in silos. It's got to be, and some of the stuff can be linear, some of it can't be. So as we started seeing where TARP theme 2 was going, it just made a lot of sense to say, look, the theme 3 stuff that's compensation related, we need to implement that with theme 4, and the theme 3 items that are not compensation related, it needs to be integrated into the business process reworking, re-engineering that's going to happen as part of theme 2. And so that in a nutshell is where we're at with theme 3. We're getting the final batches of recommendations from the vendor. And like I said, the theme 4 compensation related rules will work on with theme 4. Everything else we're going to roll into the theme 3 work. The theme 2 work. There's so many themes, but we're essentially bringing these 3 and 4 separate themes that have been worked separately. Essentially, now as we get closer to as we get into the implementation phase of all these themes, the implementation will be integrated.
One final summary point to that. What we realized, and this kind of goes to Commissioner McDonough's earlier question during Ann's presentation, if you have your personnel rules can't reinforce a strategy around long-term compensation if you don't have a strategy. And so it's important today to anchor us as we go forward in that theme 4 piece, where for the first time, you're going to see us try and chart a very prescriptive strategy for how we are trying to compete within a marketplace in a way that gives us a guiding star. And then theme 3 will reinforce that going forward. Our rules will reinforce 2 said strategy, 2 said vision and values in themes 1 and 2.
Go ahead, Scott.
All right, so our final theme is theme 4, modernization of job classification and compensation plans. And leading off for this section will be Joanna Berg.
Thank you, Scott.
Joanna, you're on mute this time. Your cat must have muted you.
That would be funny if it weren't so true. Good afternoon, commissioners. Mr. Chair, it's my privilege to be here this afternoon, unmuted, and presenting the TARP 4 update on behalf of our project team. This afternoon, I am going to hit the high points of the work that this team has achieved over the last quarter. Our vendor, Gallagher, will be coming to the board in a workshop setting in the first quarter of 2021, where they will do a complete walkthrough of their methodology and the math that they used behind this work. So I am not today going to be walking through regression analyses or other statistical modeling, but I'm going to show a little bit of the work to highlight for you all this afternoon the progress that we have made. Our most significant accomplishment on behalf of our team over the last quarter has been the establishment of a compensation philosophy, and we have the highlights reflected here on this slide. We are recommending that we are positioning or anchoring our compensation at the 65th percentile of our relevant comparators. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Joanna.
Okay, sorry, I thought I heard someone shout.
I did too, but keep going.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're recommending that we are positioning at the 65th percentile of our relative comparators, and I will review in an upcoming slide what those relative comparators are. So what we're saying here today is if we look at the combined market range of our comparator organizations, that we are recommending anchoring our salaries at that 65th percentile, which is aligned to where our actual pay is today. And that is another headliner for you today, is that we are broadly very competitive as an organization with our comparator organizations. We are also recommending moving forward with a new structure that encourages a movement to a performance-based culture, which was discussed also in the August board workshop. And we're recommending moving into a salary structure that includes both a step zone and an enhanced performance zone. And I will expand on those on the next slide if we could move forward, Anne. Thank you. So we are recommending moving with a two-phased salary structure. The first step of the salary structure, what we're calling the step zone, is our working title. Within that zone, individuals will receive regular step increases as we are used to in this zone, provided of course that there is satisfactory performance, and those steps will take us up to the market rate, which is that 65th percentile market rate. So within this first phase of the salary structure, employees will be able to earn a base salary that leads to compensation at that 65th percentile. And then we are recommending a second phase of the salary structure, which we are calling the enhanced performance zone. So once an employee has received that market rate in a salary scale, employees whose performance exceeds satisfactory may receive performance-based increases up to the top of that performance zone. So what we recognize here is that while we are all really on a continuous learning path through our careers, that there really is a phase in a job where employees are expected to achieve full proficiency in their profession, in their position. And that full proficiency is achieved in the step zone under this philosophy. And then the second segment is really aligning with excellence in performance and giving individuals an opportunity to apply those skill sets, that proficiency that they have gained, in ways that significantly impact their department or their service team or the county on a county-wide basis. I also want to highlight, as we look at the performance expectations in each zone, which have not yet been developed, that those will be aligned to the competencies that are being established in TARP 2 and which Human Resources will be discussing with the board further in the December 15th board workshop. So here too, as Scott referenced, you see the synergistic coming together and kind of the de-siloing of each of these 4 TARP themes as we move toward implementation. Next slide, please. I mentioned that we are very competitive in our region, and I want to just acknowledge here that that is due to the strong work of our HR team over the past years. The core comparator organizations are those that you see listed here. Gallagher surveyed several dozen organizations around the country as part of the salary surveys they did within this work, and they will walk you through this detail in more detail in the first quarter of 2021. However, I just want to highlight for the board today that overall Ramsey County's pay was favorable when compared to this broader national range. That we through the work of the project narrowed our core comparator organizations to those that you see here, recognizing that truly we need to be the most competitive in our region that's aligned with the goals of the TARP project and also the reality of the job shed that we are in. Next slide, please, Anne. So I recognize that this is a difficult slide to fully see, and I just want to orient you to it at a really high level here as a bit of a teaser for some of the detail that will be coming from Gallagher in the upcoming board workshop. But if you, this slide demonstrates the 75th and the 65th and the 50th market percentiles as compared to our actual Ramsey County actual average salaries. So if you look at the black line, You see there, that is the actual average salary in Ramsey County. And you see it along the continuum from A1 are the lower compensated positions up to E9 are the higher compensated positions. And what we're wanting to demonstrate here is that middle orange line, which is the core group at the market 65th percentile, which is what we are recommending. We are demonstrating here the high level of alignment with our current actual salaries. And you can, if you look really closely, or if this gets blown out to a higher level or to a magnified a little bit, you will see that there are a number of our current classifications that are in fact below that 65th percentile. And making adjustments to those classifications will be one of the first decision points of the TARP 4 implementation as we move into that phase. I do not know what those positions are today. Our team is not aware of that, but that's part of the detail that Gallagher will be providing and part of the alignment that we will need to make in the implementation phase as we move forward to ensure alignment with that 65th percentile. Next slide, please, Anne.
And just as you transition slides, one key point that I want to clarify, we did not map our current actual average and then figure out, reverse engineer our way to a 65th percentile market number as our strategy. We in fact looked at across these various different market groups. We walked through the plottings of what would it look like at the 25th, 50th, 75th percentiles. What could that cost for the organization? How do you think about implementation versus strategy? And what we came down on was 65th percent benchmarked against this core custom group being the key. Then we went back and had them plot the black dotted line, which was interesting because it turned out that in many ways, while we do have some deviation in certain triangles, we found out that on the whole, we don't have a massive divergence from that strategy, which is good. And my big takeaway from that is that over time, I want to give credit that as HR engaged in individual market studies for individual jobs, they did a good job of keeping the organization competitive. It's that we have not done a comprehensive strategy in multiple decades around an approach. And so what it does is you do it piecemeal over time. And this is really that comprehensive look overall. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate the clarification. So in terms of our next steps on TARP 4 and the framework for those, we want to underscore our commitment to administering the future compensation program in a fair and equitable manner. As Anne referenced in the TARP 2 update, our new compensation strategy is going to need to be accompanied by a parallel performance appraisal and performance management system. We recognize the need to implement this countywide and the need to focus on training managers and supervisors in a performance management and performance appraisal system. I can tell you as the EGCI Deputy County Manager, I have hired multiple department heads into departments where they have come in to discover there really had been no meaningful performance management done to date. This is a big change for our organization. And like the TARP 2 work, implementation of this direction is going to be a multi-year endeavor. We will be incorporating the TARP 1 behaviors that were referenced, as well as the TARP 2 competencies, as again, we bring all of this work together in a synergistic and unsiloed method. And with that, I guess the other point I will make is that the performance-based salary structure will likely be implemented first with unrepresented employees. This is Gallagher, our vendor's experience with multiple other national implementations, and we would expect that that would be our process here as well. But again, that's part of what we'll be working out in the implementation phase. With that, I am happy to take any questions on TARP 3 or Scott and I on TARP 3 and 4 before I transition back to Ann and Sandy for next steps.
Just one final point on your last point. This information is coming forward at a time though where it will be available in future bargaining rounds as a part of what informs those conversations with labor. It's not that we are resistant to seeing things implemented with labor first. It's that traditionally what we've learned from our vendor is that oftentimes bargain groups want to see implementation occurring in other areas first as they work out what the change means across them and their members. And so we're open to the idea of what that might mean, but we want to use, part of our timelines has been ensuring that this information will be a part of next year. And credit to Sandy and her team as they've led the work with AFSCME right now around trying to reach a tentative agreement that allows us to bring this information in beginning next year to those discussions.
Any questions? So Mary Jo?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wondering, we get sometimes accused of stealing employees because of our wage structure, that we give such high salaries, you know, that we take people from other counties, from smaller counties. But it's clear from the data that we're not taking them from at least the metro area. We might be, I mean, people might be drawn to some of our to our work from smaller counties, but as the data showed, we kind of go back and forth with employees within the 10 county area, not necessarily based on salary, but on other things as well. Am I just correct in thinking about it that way?
Madam, or Mr. Chair, Commissioner McGuire, if I could share one thought on that. So I think the data can be a little skewed even when you look across those partnership groups. And the reason I say that is Hennepin County has 10,000 employees. I don't know how many employees the Metropolitan Council has, but we'll just go with a lot, right? There's a couple of those groups that are going to strongly anchor what you see there. If you were to look at a list that includes Anoka, Scott, Carver, Wright County, and you look at that list, you're going to see that we do pay more generally on the whole than many of those counties do. When you aggregate it together, you see where we come out at above the 50th, closer more to the 65th. I would only say from a talent attraction standpoint, though, compensation hasn't, at least going forward, let's speak about going forward. It's not our strategy just to try and out-compensate other counties as a way to draw talent. It's a mix of finding the right leaders with the right values who want to come work in the right organization, and to have more good applicants than positions at any given time. And I think that's got to be our approach going forward, particularly in an era when competing for talent will become harder.
Mr. Chair, I really appreciate that. I think that should be our focus, is really about the job, not necessarily the compensation and the work, the work environment. It should be about not necessarily all compensation. So I appreciate that. I agree with that. Thank you.
Okay, Jim?
Thanks, Raphael. I've had some issues here in and out. Are we at the end now and this is the wrap up, or do we have more slides?
No, this
Okay.
is it, Jim.
Perfect, thanks. Couple of things. First, this is really thoughtful and thorough and extremely well done. I couldn't appreciate, and then it's even more amazing that we're talking about this here, the first meeting in December, and we've just gone from March till now through a world pandemic, and you guys were still able to pull this off and get us to this. So I want to thank everybody who's been a part of this. A couple of observations. I know you guys all know this, but I think we need to make sure we're always calling it out, right? Because if we don't, that's where we get tripped up if we're not paying attention. Because just about everybody who's a part of this, everybody who's online, we're all like-minded. To all of us, this is really good stuff. But there's going to be a lot of cheese moved here. And this isn't going to necessarily be a lot of good stuff to some of the folks in our county. And how do we manage that change as we're going, and making sure that we're doing that change management and helping people along as we do this, rather than wait for the crisis or the moment in time where all of a sudden we realize, oh, wait a minute here, we've got some troubles because we didn't bring people along. And I just say that, I know you know it, but I didn't see it showed up in the slides here, and I'm sure you're coming back a number of times, but at some point, maybe talk about that change management and how you're going to be prepared to bring people along, especially as you get to implementation, but even before implementation, right? That moving people along starts even before you come and tell them we're going to start doing things differently. It looks like Ann's got something to say about that. I'd love to hear it, but I'll throw out my last observation, and then I'll just listen to you guys. But the other thing that's occurred to me, and it's come up, right? It's really come up. because of COVID and exactly what we're doing, right? Our workforce shed is dramatically changed, right? Jack Swanson in Russell County is worried he's going to lose his best and brightest because they can work for Ramsey County and still live in Russell County, right? And you know, how we recruit can really change dramatically on how people need to participate for their jobs, right? We could potentially, for some of our jobs, our folks could live in Russell County or even Florida or even in the Bay Area and still be, you know, a employee of ours. And what does that look like? And how do we make sure we're on the cutting edge of that, or that's being incorporated into this conversation that we're having with this work that you guys are doing? And again, thanks for the work. I think this is just, you guys have done just an amazing job.
Who's gonna address that? That was a question, right, Jim?
Yes, I will
It
address
can
that.
be taken as a comment and it can come back in the multitude of opportunities. I'm good with that. Or if someone wants to touch on it now, that's fine too.
Well, let me just say before you, Ann, I think you're gonna give that a shot. I wanna echo what Jim said in terms of the great work. I mean, this is complicated and very tedious work. So I want to give you guys a lot of space. It is from our perspective, you know, when you look at all the rules and all, and they're in different locations and you got to tweak them all. I mean, it's painstaking work maybe is the way I should put it. But to your question, I mean, when I hear you talk about employees could be even living in Florida or something like that, that raises a lot of other issues regarding our, you know, here we're trying to employ folks, right, in our own county. So it does get to be, you know, it's something we need to move deliberately and take our time at it. I think we got to give you folks a lot of space to try and get it as right as possible.
You know, I'm sorry I jump in, and the reverse is a risk or a threat to us, right? Our best and brightest could work in the Bay Area, but still live here with our quality of life, our cost for households and living, but they could be working for Silicon Valley folks or, you know, and so that the risk is the opposite too, right? The same thing Jack's worried about for Russell County, we should be taking a look at and worried about our best and brightest still being a part of our community, but actually their talents are being leveraged somewhere else.
Yeah, and we got it. That's part of the challenge. How do we have that balance, right? Everything's going to be a balance. Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner McDonough. I am going to pass it off to Elizabeth Toldman for a second to respond to a piece of that, and then I'll cover the change management piece in the next slide here.
Thanks, Ann, and commissioners and Commissioner McDonough, just in response to your question, we actually just sent an email to senior management team this week, letting them know about our ad hoc telecommuting policy, which is really in response to the pandemic and it's still temporary. But our county manager has authorized myself and a team across the county to start talking about what a permanent work from home structure would look like. This is going to take some time and some extensive engagement across our organization and employees at all levels. And it has to align with our strategic facilities work, our residents first work, and other strategic priorities. It's not an insular or mutual or exclusive area of work. It needs to align with that. But I agree that if we're going to attract and retain the greatest talent and for the public sector industry to survive, we do need to start thinking about things in modern ways and innovative ways and things beyond boundaries. But for right now, the message is still, we are in a temporary ad hoc situation, but I have been authorized to move forward on a permanent work from home structure going into the new year.
And let me clarify that language because I'm a little jumpy on that. I want to just say, and I appreciate all of that in the process side. It's not going to be called a permanent work from home. It's not going to be the idea of always being able to work off site. It's a flexible workplace environment policy we're going to create, which is the idea that we're going to be more flexible than in the past in the way that we want to go about defining that. I think there are values and benefits to teams spending time together. And there's value that we see in our work. And we hear from a lot of employees right now who write in and say, I miss my colleagues. And so we want to be thoughtful on that. It's not like we're just never going to run buildings with people in them anymore. And I didn't want that to be a takeaway. And thanks, Elizabeth, for that broader update on the work that we're about to embark on.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's just, there's a lot of opportunity here for us, I think, as we begin to explore this, because I do think it could help us potentially fill positions that maybe we've had some difficulty filling if the talent isn't in our backyard, right? And so we have options. We've been able to show that we've been able to do a lot of this work in a virtual environment, but there is also a benefit and a lot of importance, right, behind if we value people, are we going to show up for people and make sure that we are continuing to provide valuable service to our residents as well. So it's a balance, as County Manager O'Connor mentioned. I do want to address Commissioner McDonough's question around, this is a lot of change management, and I want to say thank you for recognizing a lot of the work that we have somehow been able to pull off in the last year or so as we work through the COVID response as well, because it's not without, right, the amazing sponsors that are here on this call with us and an amazing team that we work with to be able to continue to move this in a way that is furthering our goals here in HR and for the county. So this is really about this next phase. You know, we had initially divided these 4 themes into these manageable pieces so that we could kind of tackle them individually, from just to make it more manageable as we work through this process. And essentially, now that sort of the phase 1 work is wrapping up, it really is about how they fit back together and how we implement this. So I'm going to hand it over to Felice Abea, who's our project manager and was onboarded pretty quickly in the last, I don't know, month or so, but we're really excited to have her. She's going to be an amazing addition to helping us to kind of lay out this work.
Thank you, Anne. So thanks for having me, commissioners and Mr. Chair. As Anne stated several times, and as a lot of you have asked the question in regards to timeline, that's definitely going to be something that I'll be focusing on as we get into the integration implementation phase of this project. So I'm being brought more on board right now so that we can begin to look at how all of these pieces collectively can come back together. As Anne stated, we initially kind of tore them apart so that we could break them down. Now that we've done that, we feel like we're at a point where we can start to put these pieces of the puzzle back together, start aligning some of this work that will be implementing in parallel with one another. It doesn't necessarily, we're not going to be going from culture to strategic HR. We're going to be running a lot of these in parallel with one another. And so over the next 90 days, I will be working on a project plan and a timeline with Anne and Sandy, and I'll be focused on goals and milestones. And then we have put together some executive one-pager readouts so that we can continue to keep all of you updated in a faster fashion than we've been doing. As my understanding, some things have maybe not been communicated as well. And so I'll really be focused on communicating to the executive sponsors and just making sure that everyone has what they need so that there are no questions moving forward.
Thank you, Felice. Any questions? Well, I think I want to say thank you for the great work. I really applaud you. I think this is hard work, to be honest. It's a lot of pieces, So thank you very much for all your good work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was helpful feedback for us today too, as we laid this out and planned our next conversation. So we really appreciate hearing from the board and what'll be a series of dialogues. And I just want to give one last shout out to the leaders you heard from who presented today. They have been toiling at this while dealing with COVID response, many serving in dual roles, and recognizing the importance of this work to the organization. They never quit. They just keep saying, like, we're going to find a way to move this forward. And so thank you for the time today and getting us through this workshop.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
Good work.
Good work, everyone.
Very good work. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Have a good day.